Okay, this is part two. Usually, when in between painting sessions, I will, while the paint's drying, spend some time just sitting and looking at it um, from a distance, sit in a chair and kind of think about it. And usually, certain things just pop out at you, and not that they're really important to get fixed at this stage. But you might as well. So some of the things I noticed here, um, I decided that the pillar on the right, I wanted it to be closer to the edge, um, just to spread the composition out a little bit. I noticed that the hair on top of her head wasn't going up quite high enough. So, again, to stretch out the composition a little bit, wanted to move that up. Noticed that the mirror basically wasn't turned at the right angle. And you can't really tell from this view, but there wasn't really enough coverage most places outside of the model. Most of the background lights and darks just needed more paint on them. So that was sort of what I was thinking about when I started. First steps. Basically trying to put a lot of paint on, which I would also be trying to do anyway, for various reasons. But right out of the gate, that was what was sort of first on my mind, is glom some paint on. This step, not necessarily always the case, but I'm using a smaller brush, basically one size down from the first stage. Partly that was just by accident. It was the brush I grabbed, but it is in keeping with the sort of methodology to step down, in brush size as you go. If I'd thought about it much, I might have started with the bigger brush and maybe ended up switching halfway through this stage. It doesn't matter. This brush is a Simply Simmons, I think it's a 3/4, maybe 5/8 inch flat watercolor brush. It's pretty worn out. But it really doesn't matter for this. Really, all that matters at this stage is that it's going to hold paint. And I guess I tend to like something that's fairly soft and pliable, so that it doesn't. It's more inoffensive, I guess. So you don't get so many distinctive marks out of it. It's more of a mop. So at about this stage, I've pretty much got some paint down, although I haven't actually done the blacks yet, but that's just because I don't like to go too dark, too light. It just ends up getting the brush dirty. So, but I think there's enough coverage, and I think I'm pretty happy with the composition, at least that I've made notes of it. For example, the sort of white band, moving the flower vase over a little bit and so forth, the shape of the mirror. And so that's why I grabbed the white again. And it's more of a convenience for me, but I've heard other people say it as I go along, whenever changes get made, or really whenever progress gets made. Like every once in a while, I go back and sort of reinforce the highlights and the accents. So that's what I'm doing right here, is basically just grabbing some pure white and going back in and sort of notating to myself where things are in the composition. Sort of where the draperies, where are the in this case bows and hair decorations, and where are the main lines of the dress, where are the bright reflections on things. And it gets a little tedious. I mentioned it. Not really anything's actually happening in the video, but just what paints are there, and the selection of paints isn't totally arbitrary. I think I'm just going to go through them. Starting from the top left, where you can see it here, that's gesso. So that's a pure white that is essentially flat. Titanium white, normal acrylic white, it has the sort of glossiness of all the other paints, whatever the standard medium is. The gesso, how it's different is that it dries to just like an eggshell, very non-reflective, matte, but still very bright, pure white. Below that is that's milky white, which is sort of a trade name that I've never used it before this. Normally in that spot I would have unbleached titanium, which is actually slightly darker than that, but it doesn't matter too much. It's a fine color. Point of it is that it's a dirty white, an off-white, as opposed to the titanium white and the gesso, which are sort of pure, bright white. And it's just for when you don't want it to be quite so bright, but not have any tint to it. Next one down is titanium white, just plain titanium white. Below that is the metallic gold, talked about in the last video. So moving on to the next column there, at the top, that dark one is phthalo green, sort of dark, transparent green. It's in this yellow column just because I didn't really want to have that many yellows. So I probably don't use it very often. I think I've used one touch of it in this painting so far. But sometimes you just don't want to be mixing up a green, so it's nice to have it there just to use. And frankly, this palette had a few more slots than I needed, so I just kind of threw some things in there to fill it up. Below that is a sort of an allaride yellow, which is sort of an orangey, organic kind of looking yellow. It's also fairly transparent, so that has its places. It actually, what's going down now, you can see that it's like a glaze almost already. It's fairly transparent on its own. And really, so there's three yellows here. There's that which is sort of the dirty yellow. Below that is the cadmium yellow, and below that is the lemon yellow. So you've got sort of a standard yellow in the middle, a greenish yellow in the bottom, and a reddish yellow above it. The cadmium is not real cadmium. It's a Hansa. I think it's Hansa Yellow 74, which is pretty often used in sort of cadmium yellow light hue paints, and it's actually a pretty nice color on its own. I tend to like the ones where they just use the pigment yellow 74 and don't try and make it look too much like cadmium. And usually they do that by adding a little bit of white or a little bit of like naphthol red maybe, or maybe iron oxide red, and just small amounts to sort of doctor it and make it look, to give it the sort of chalky look that the cadmium yellow has. But I'd rather have the pure pigment, and the pigment yellow 74 is it's really kind of plasticky, plain, simple looking yellow, but that's nice for mixing and for underpaintings like this. At the bottom is a lemon yellow. In that case, I think it's Hansa Yellow, Pigment Yellow 3. It's just sort of straightforward and plain. There are other... actually, cadmium yellow lemon doesn't really look that good. I think I like... it's bismuth vanadate yellow, which is a very nice... It actually has sort of its own pure lemon-ness, as opposed to most things that they call lemon yellow, which are really just plain yellow with sort of a green tinge to them. It doesn't really matter too much. The next column over is the blues, which really don't get used much in this painting, but at the top is a phthalo blue, which I put there just so it was next to the phthalo green. That's a transparent, very dark, very powerful, very sort of liquidy, satiny blue. It's really nice. It's candy-like to work with, but it's also very distinctive. It's sort of, once you use it, it's there. It makes nice skies and water, but it takes some attention to make it not look just like candy. Next one down is a new one to me. It's a mix. It's a Prussian blue hue, and it's made up of ultramarine and some earth pigments. I don't know, but it's nice. It gives it kind of a denim color. It's a nice dark, as in trending more towards black than blue. And yet, when you draw it out, it becomes transparent, even though it's transparent while it's still dark, which is nice. Next one down there, that sort of stark blue is cobalt blue hue, and in this case, that's made with the phthalo blue and some titanium, because it's the cheap version. But it's okay for these purposes. It's basically a bland yellow. And actually, you can kind of see how I arranged the palette. The second one up is the plain titanium white, plain yellow, plain blue. And off to the right where you can't see it, there's the plain red. And then next to that, the plain black. So basically, the second row is the plain colors. And the ones below it are the sort of zippy, transparent versions of these things. I can't remember what that blue is that I use there. I'm not using it in this, but my guess would be, I don't know. Not important. I'll figure it out. So the next column over, you can't see them. The reds. The top red is sort of a burgundy. I think it's an alizarin crimson hue. And I don't actually know what that one's made of, but it's some sort of quinacridone violet red mix. And it's a nice color to have because it's sort of hard to mix. I mean, it's not hard to do, but I don't want to have to be mixing that sort of dark maroon every time I want to use it. It just takes a while to mix, and you end up making too much, and it's a mess. So it's a good convenience one to have. The next one down from there would be and I'm using it in this painting. It's sort of in that cloth of the chaise lounge at the bottom. It's the sort of brighter color, and it's a pigment orange 73, which is again one of my favorites, and I'm glad I found it in a cheap paint. But it's pigment orange, and it's usually labeled as orange. In fact, I think this one was called cadmium orange hue, but to me it just registers as a bright pure red, and that's how I use it. It's sort of my top red. Maybe I'm colorblind or something. Anyway, the next one below that is going to be a pure spectrum red, which in this case is the pyrrole red. It's 250, 255. And below that is a more sort of plain naphthol red, just sort of a dull red, sort of a placeholder. And also in there would be the quinacridone magenta, the fast pink that I talked about yesterday. And then the next column over is the neutrals. And so starting at the top there, I've got Payne's Gray, which is a convenience color. It's black and blue, basically. And it's a nice one to have. Just it's a nice sort of shorthand for shadow or dark. You can basically just sort of the opposite of white. You can, whereas black, if you put black on something, it just turns black. Payne's Gray will tend to darken things down. In this painting, I think the only places you can see it are in the silk, on the two platforms, the one she's leaning on and the one way off to the right, where there's sort of a blue silk. That Payne's Gray is the dark component of that. Just put a little bit in there and smear it around, and it subdues things without actually making them black. The next one down from that would be a burnt umber, which is sort of it's brown. It's a dark, cool brown. And usually I would also have burnt sienna in there, but I don't have any right now. So burnt sienna is sort of a chocolatey, yellowy, warm brown. Very nice to have. Both those you can mix them, if you need them, but it's just nice to have ready. So, and then the third slot down is pure black. That's what all the dark here is, and I like to use black a lot. And to me, it's just a sort of simple shortcut. I hear a lot about people saying, "Oh, you shouldn't use black." and I don't really know why. To me, it's nice sometimes to just be able to knock everything down to nothing with the black. So that's what that's for. And then the bottom slot there is raw umber, which is another one of my sort of favorite colors. Raw umber is sort of a gray wood color. It looks like weathered fences, but to me, I use it as a light black. It's actually sort of a grayish brown, but there you go. So that's sort of what's in this underpainting palette, and I chose those colors for being they have to be cheap. These are absolutely the cheapest $2-3 tube paints. I don't want to be putting money into this, so that's first. So, but given that, these are the best colors, best pigments, best behaved paints I could find. And what's in here represents a generic, can do anything kind of palette. And in this case, for instance, I'm not really using the blues at all, just because of the nature of the scene. But yeah, I mean, when I do live shows, I'll pretty much load up a palette like this, and it just covers every sort of eventuality. Oh, somewhere in here I've actually put in also it's in one of the blues. I squirted in some dioxazine purple, violet, which is just a nice pure purple. And the reason for that is it's just if you're painting somewhere and somebody's wearing a purple shirt, it's a real nuisance to have to mix up that the pure spectrum-y purple. It just and you can never get it quite vibrant enough. And dioxazine purple it goes a really long way. So you buy one tube of it and you have it forever. And it's just really nice to have it there when you need it. So going back to the painting, you can see that having done a bunch of basically putting a bunch of highlights down, and also kind of doing some sketching and sort of working the anatomy and the folds of the fabric and so forth. Now I figured, okay, let's go with the black and go in and basically I'm just looking at my reference watercolor right now and just mapping off where is there black, and it's not even paying attention to the content of the meaning of the picture. I'm really just kind of squinting my eyes and saying, where is there a blob of black? It's kind of fun actually too, because when you do that, when you're just saying where's black, you put it down, and for example, I'm looking at right now at the vase on the right, those two dabs of black. When I put them down, I wasn't really paying attention to what they were, but now they sort of define where the vase is separating it out from the pillar. So it's kind of fun because it seems to be happening in front of you, as opposed to being something you want to do. And that's also kind of tied in with how I paint. I'm pretty farsighted, and it's actually kind of annoying because it's my vision. I can put glasses on and see up close, but up close isn't really the distance where this painting is. The painting is actually right in between the distance where I can see uncorrected and where the glasses stop working. So most of the time I'm actually working somewhat blind, and I don't really see what's I don't see the effect of what's happening until I step back and sit down and look at it. So a lot of the painting process I do is mechanical in a sense. It's procedural. I'm working from a sketch or from life, and basically I know what things will do, as opposed to actually trying to control them going down. So I'll look at something and I'll say, okay, well, that's got a component of magenta and a component of red. So I'll put those two things on a brush and kind of put it down where I know it's supposed to be. And it works. It works good. It gives kind of a unique look, I guess, which, if I was trying to be photorealistic, it might bother me, but I just go with it. And I enjoy it. That's part of where the sort of blurry, impressionistic, whatever, comes from. See right there, I'm trying to sketch back in the life drawings that are hanging on the wall behind her. Not too accurately, but just to sort of put in that there is charcoal drawing up there. Another nice thing about having the palette mapped out this way and actually laid out in these grids and working in that mechanical procedural method is when you're painting, like for example, this thing. When I did the original sketches for this is in a bar, with a stage with stage lights, red, blue, green, whatever, and they're always changing. So when you're trying to paint this, you don't really ever get a fixed look at what color anything is, and it's certainly hardly ever a neutral light. So it's always changing and it's colorful, and it sort of forces you to let go of any aspects of control. Um, and further in that environment, so you can't see what color the things are that you're painting with any sort of fixed regularity. You have to kind of discern or intuit what color things are, but you also can't see the what you're working on. You can't see what colors are registering on the paper. You can't see what the colors in your palette look like because of the changing and non-neutral lighting. So having a sort of a knowledge and a proceduralness lets you just say, okay, well, it doesn't look purple, but I know it is, so I'll put that on there. And of course, it's always fun to get them home and look at them under normal lighting and just be kind of amazed at how peculiar they look sometimes, or how well they turn out sometimes too. And it's something that I actually think a lot about, but don't have any good idea of why it happens. Is a lot of paintings that I do this way, if you view them, they really change drastically different times of day. So if there's sun shining on it, or if there's indirect sunlight, it's cloudy, artificial lights, combinations of those things. I have some paintings that change almost entirely. They'll change from being, a washed out whitish yellow to a dark, olive drab green, things of that nature, which I enjoy. I mean, I put them on the wall and I just kind of look at them all day and watch how they change. Like I said, I have no idea why that happens. I'll probably figure it out at some point. So here, I was getting the painting was wet at this point, and I'm going through, and actually I probably was just thinking, okay, I need to clean the brush off, but then, kept going. But essentially what I am doing right now is just finishing up again. Looking at it and saying, okay, where is there too much paint? Where have I missed out a highlight? Where can I? But since this is the second stage, I'm more conscious of what the real composition is supposed to be and what the real colors and what I want. So I don't want to leave it too contrary to its finished state, I guess. So that's why you see I'm going through and reinforcing the highlights, putting in the correct colors and so on. Yeah. Okay. So now it finally occurred to me to go through, and since I'm finishing up, I'm gonna put a lot of paint on here, and so what you can see me doing there is putting on pretty thick gobs of white, and essentially trying to trace out the folds of the cloth in her dress, or in the hair, or wherever there's white. I'm gonna go through and basically put a nice big thick layer of white in, because like I said, now I know it's gonna be able to dry. And so this is the stage where you end up getting the character lines in the impasto. So this will dry and set up, and that'll leave a brush stroke or a ridge in various places that'll print through right to the end of the painting. So this is basically the first time where I felt like, okay, I know this is approximately the final composition, so it's okay to put down that much paint. But also in this session, I'm not going to be putting down, I'm basically done. I can't really put down a whole lot more. So I'm going to put this down knowing I'm not really going to have to touch it again. And if I did, say, want to knock this down and put, remap something geographically, all that paint being down now would basically make that impossible. You'd have to scrape it off or whatever. Okay, so now this is slightly interesting, and it's interesting because I'm using the three different reds I have here: the sort of medium, the dark maroon, and the high top red. And this is about the point where I'll start doing that, using multiple versions of a color. Uh, Not so much to map out reality, but just so that what's there has a little more depth. It's not just one color. It's you get it is mostly random, but you are getting a vibrancy or a tension or a pushing because of the varying pigments, the different levels of hue. And the same with the values. There's lights and darks and so forth. But and again, it's almost synthetic, but it's nice to kind of leave the thing looking a little bit more realistic. It's just, even though it's a texture more than it is an actual representation. Yeah, just a little bit more. Again, I'm just sort of fidgeting here. Really, I probably should have stopped here, but I'm thinking probably just clean the brush off, and then of course I forget that I was going to stop and keep going. So